speeches by me and talks by me and interviews where I talk about unfair trade practices. We've lost, over a fairly short period of time, 60,000 factories in our country, closed, shuttered, gone. 6 million jobs at least, gone. And now they're starting to come back. You see what's happening with Chrysler, with Foxconn, with so many other companies wanting to come back into the United States. But we have one particular problem, and I view them as a friend. I have tremendous respect for President Xi. We have a great relationship. They're helping us a lot in North Korea, and that's China. But we have a trade deficit, depending on the way you calculate, of $504 billion. Now, some people would say it's really $375 billion. Many different ways of looking at it, but any way you look at it, it is the largest deficit of any country in the history of our world. It's out of control. We have a tremendous intellectual property theft situation going on, which likewise is hundreds of billions of dollars, and that's on a yearly basis. I've spoken to the president. I've spoken to representatives of China. We've been dealing with it very seriously. As you know, we're renegotiating NAFTA. We'll see how that turns out. Many countries are calling to negotiate better trade deals because they don't want to have to pay the steel and aluminum tariffs, so we are negotiating with various countries. Mr. Lighthizer, Mr. Ross, we are just starting a negotiation with the European Union because they've really shut out our country to a large extent. They have barriers that they can trade with us, but we can't trade with them. They have very strong barriers. They have very high tariffs. We don't. It's just not fair. NAFTA has been a very bad deal for the United States, but we'll make it better, or we'll have to do something else. The deal we have with South Korea is a very one-sided deal. It's a deal that has to be changed. So we have a lot of things happening, but in particular with China, we're going to be doing a Section 301 trade action. It could be about $60 billion, but that's really just a fraction of what we're talking about. I've been speaking with the highest Chinese representatives, including the president, and I've asked them to reduce the trade deficit immediately by $100 billion. It's a lot. So that would be anywhere from 25%, depending on the way you figure, to maybe something even more than that. But we have to do that. The word that I want to use is reciprocal. When they charge 25% for a car to go in, and we charge 2% for their car to come into the United States, that's not good. That's how China rebuilt itself. The tremendous money that we've paid since the founding of the World Trade Organization, which has actually been a disaster for us. It's been very unfair to us. The arbitrations are very unfair. The judging's been very unfair. And knowingly, we always have a minority, and it's not fair. So we're talking to World Trade, we're talking to NAFTA, we're talking to China, we're talking to European Union. And I will say every single one of them wants to negotiate. And I believe that in many cases, maybe all cases, we'll end up negotiating a deal. So we've spoken to China, and we're in the midst of a very large negotiation. We'll see where it takes us. But in the meantime, we're sending a Section 301 action. I'll be signing it right here, right now. I'd like to ask Bob Lighthizer to say a few words about the 301 and where we are in that negotiation. And we're doing things for this country that should have been done for many, many years. We've had this abuse by many other countries and groups of countries that were put together in order to take advantage of the United States, and we don't want that to happen. We're not going to let that happen. It's probably one of the reasons I was elected, maybe one of the main reasons, but we're not going to let that happen. We have right now an $800 billion trade deficit with the world. So think of that. So let's say we have 500 to 375, but let's say we have 500 with China, but we have 800 total with the world. That would mean that China is more than half. So we're going to get it taken care of. And frankly, it's going to make us a much stronger, much richer nation. The word is reciprocal. That's the word I want everyone to remember. We want reciprocal, mirror. Some people call it a mirror tariff or a mirror tax. Just use the word reciprocal. If they charge us, we charge them the same thing. That's the way it's got to be. That's not the way it is. For many, many years, for many decades, it has not been that way. And I will say the people we're negotiating with, smilingly, they really agree with us. I really believe they cannot believe they've gotten away with this for so long. I'll talk to Prime Minister Abe of Japan and others, a great guy, friend of mine, and there'll be a little smile on their face. And the smile is, I can't believe we've been able to take advantage of the United States for so long. So those days are over. Ambassador Lighthizer, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. First of all, for those of you who don't know, Section 301 is a statute that gives substantial power, authority to the President to correct actions in certain circumstances where there's unfair acts, policies, or practices by our trading partners. In this case, the area is technology. Technology is probably the most important part of our economy. There's 44 million people who work in high technology areas. No country has as much technology-intensive industry as the United States, and technology is really the backbone of the future of the American economy. Given these problems, the President asked USTR to conduct a study. We conducted a thorough study. We had hearings. We reviewed tens of thousands of pages of documents. We talked to many, many business people. We had testimony, as I say, and we concluded that, in fact, China does have a policy of forced technology transfer, of requiring licensing at less than economic value, at state capitalism, wherein they go in and buy technology in the United States in non-economic ways, and then finally of cyber theft. The result of this has been that the President has analyzed it. We have a 200-page study which we'll put out, and he has concluded that we should put in place tariffs on appropriate products. We can explain later how we concluded what products they are, that we would put investment restrictions on China with respect to high technology, and that we'll file a WTO case because one of the actions here does involve a WTO violation. This is an extremely important action, very significant and very important for the future of the country, really across industries, and I would really like to thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me the opportunity to work on it.
Thank you very much, Bill. Secretary Ross.
Intellectual property rights are our future, and it's no accident that in June of this year, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office will issue its 10 millionth patent. 10 million patents. There's no country in the history of the world that remotely approaches that. So the steel and aluminum actions we've taken deal more or less with the present. This action on intellectual property rights deals with the future. So we're trying to solve both today's problem and problems that otherwise will be forthcoming. That's why these actions are so important and so important in unison with each other. We will end up negotiating these things rather than fighting over them, in my view.
Mike Pence would like to say something.
Thank you, Mr. President, and to all our honored guests. Today's action sends a clear message that This president and our entire administration are determined to put American jobs and American workers first. The action the president will take today under Section 301 also makes it clear that the era of economic surrender is over. The United States of America is taking targeted and focused action to protect not only American jobs, but America's technology, which will power and drive an innovation economy for decades to come. It is just one more step of a promise made and a promise kept by President Trump.
So we'll sign right now. I just want to let everybody know, just for a second time, that we are in the midst of very major and very positive negotiations. Positive for the United States, and actually very positive for other countries also. We have some of our great business leaders and leaders, period, right behind me. I may ask Marilyn Lockheed, the leading woman's business executive in this country, according to many. And we buy billions and billions of dollars worth of that beautiful F-35. It's stealth. You cannot see it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Better be correct, right?
Absolutely.
Marilyn, please say a few words.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I would just say that this is a very important moment for our country in that we are addressing what is a critical area for the aerospace and defense industry, and that is protecting our intellectual property. As has been expressed, that is a threat to us if we have that stolen from our companies, because that is the lifeblood of our companies. And so we very much welcome this action on the part of the Trump administration and the President of the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. This is the first of many. This is number one, but this is the first of many. Thank you all very much. Marilyn?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Would you like to testify to Special Counsel Robert Mueller, sir?
Thank you.
President Donald Trump applying his signature to a new order that would slap tariffs on as much as $50 billion of imports with China. Hi, everyone. I'm ABC News political director Rick Klein, and you've just been watching the live picture of the president making that signature official. The new tariffs could take effect in as little as 15 days. He says it'll be the first of many, and it comes on the heels, of course, of his announcements regarding new tariffs. This is a major escalation and a major change in trade policy. I'm joined now at the White House by Alex Malin, White House reporter. And Alex, I know you've been talking to White House officials. How are they framing this, and what concerns are they addressing when it comes to the broader economy? The idea of a trade war, very real right now.
Well, I think that we're definitely seeing some of the most aggressive action from the Trump administration with these latest moves, but this is something that the White House has actually been working on for months and months. Into mid-2017 was when President Trump actually ordered this review by the Commerce Department to look at the ways that China might be abusing intellectual property rights of U.S. companies. And so this is something that was actually rolled out a lot differently than what we saw with those tariffs on steel and aluminum. This is something that was deliberated throughout the U.S. Trade Representative's office, and it was pretty smooth comparatively with those tariffs, which were more sporadic and seemed almost out of nowhere, just what we heard from the president on the campaign trail. But a key line from the president and what he just said there was, this was one of the main reasons that I was elected. So he obviously knows that this is something that dates well back, even before he was a candidate, and something that he's always run on even before he entered the political arena. He believes that China is eating the U.S.'s lunch, and he believes that it's time that leaders take a stronger stance and retaliate against them.
And indeed, he did talk about on the campaign trail, the markets are reacting, and I want to get back to that in a second. But there's another storyline developing just down the road on Pennsylvania Avenue over at the Capitol, where the House of Representatives is in the midst of voting right now on a massive spending bill that would cover the rest of this fiscal year. It is a hodgepodge of so many different things. It also could be the last legislative action of the year. Ali Rogan, who covers Capitol Hill for us, joins us by phone. Ali, it looks like this is going to go through, at least in the House. Give us a sense of how big a deal this is and how much money we're talking about.
Yeah, Rick, it looks like the House just now got enough votes to pass this. The vote is still open, as you mentioned, but it looks like this is going to sail through the House. Then it heads to the Senate. I'll talk about the fate there in a second, but a couple top-line numbers in this budget agreement. It includes a big increase in military spending from last year and a slight pay raise for service members. That's something that Republicans are touting particularly big. I know the White House is holding an on-camera briefing right now to sort of spin what they see as the successes in this omnibus spending bill. It also includes $1.6 billion in border security, which is much less than what President Trump wanted. He was calling for $25 billion. So there was some questions yesterday as to whether or not he was actually going to be willing to sign this bill into law, because it does not include as much border funding as he wants. The bill also contains funding for this sort of very small project, relatively speaking, that President Trump has chosen as his this thing that he really wanted to defeat. This is a tunnel project that spans New York and New Jersey, of course represented by his foe at the moment, Senator Chuck Schumer. It's called the Gateway Project. This bill does contain funding for Gateway, and the president's really upset about that. A couple things this bill does not include. It doesn't include any solution on a resolution to that deferred action for the children of people who came here illegally, that DACA program, those dreamers. It doesn't include any solution on that, and there's only about 30 miles of new wall construction included in that border security portion of the bill. The last thing that I want to mention is that this bill does include a bill that has bipartisan support to shore up the National Instant Criminal Background Check system. It's called the Fix NICS bill, and it would encourage and force states and local authorities to fully report background check information to federal authorities for when folks try to buy a gun. This bill is geared towards making sure that nobody falls through the cracks like they did in the case of Parkland. This is a bipartisan bill. Democrats say this is the least that Congress should be doing, but it does get done in this bill, Rick.
Yeah, and Ali, it should be noted this is probably the last action we're going to see on guns, despite the fact that the March for Our Lives going on this weekend, hundreds of thousands of teenagers are expected in Washington and beyond. I do want to mention, as you mentioned, this conservative opposition, the president upset about this. We've heard some conservatives saying, well, it's not good that we're building this tunnel, but not the wall. That's one talking point. But things are going to get more interesting in the Senate. And I feel like we've seen this movie before, Ali. We've got this government shutdown looming at the end of Friday night. But Senator Rand Paul, the Republican, libertarian-leading Republican from Kentucky, is not signing off on this. So it's possible the government actually shuts down, at least briefly, once again?
Yeah, so the big issue here is when the Senate actually starts voting on this bill. They have the ability, if all 100 members of the Senate, or 99, not counting Senator John McCain, who's not here, they all have to agree to bring this bill immediately to the floor in a process known as unanimous consent. That's something that frequently non-controversial bills, they just get unanimous consent. They go right to the floor and they get a vote. Rand Paul, a few months ago, did this exact same thing where he was the one member of the Senate who decided not to agree to that unanimous consent agreement, thereby forcing a much bigger period of debate on this bill and plunging the government into a very brief shutdown. It was just a few hours, but it was enough to call it an actual shutdown. Right now, he is not signaling how he's going to vote. A source familiar with his thinking told me just a minute ago that he wants to, number one, talk to his colleagues. The Senate is right now in their daily lunch, and so Senate Republicans are going to have a chance to discuss this bill, convince Rand Paul one way or the other. He also wants to read the bill, Rick, which surprise, surprise, the senator wants to read a bill, but this bill is more than 220 pages long. Luckily, Senator Paul is an eye doctor, so if anybody can avoid their eyes going blind by reading 2,000 pages of documents, it's Senator Paul.
2,200 pages indeed. All right, Ali Rogan, thanks for giving us that update. Rand Paul not going to win any popularity contests on Capitol Hill once again. I want to go back to Alex Malin over at the White House. As that event wrapped up a few moments ago, we got word the president answered a quick question about whether he'd like to answer questions before Robert Mueller, and his answer, Alex, is that he would like to. He's been consistent on that, I guess semi-consistent. The White House maybe a little bit less so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the White House has been the ones who've actually, the only ones that have been waffling on that. The president said, yes, I would like to sit down with Mueller. And this comes just as the announcement that one of his lead attorneys, John Dowd, is resigning from his position. Unclear just how that might be changing his legal strategy, but we know that the president is anxious. He loves the idea. I think similar to his fascination with the idea of being able to sit down with somebody like Kim Jong-un, he thinks kind of in the mind of a TV producer. He likes the idea of a show, and I think that he's not really fazed by any potential legal problems that would present him being sat face to face with Robert Mueller, even though many of his former campaign associates, when they've been face to face with the special counsel's team, have managed to get themselves into some pretty significant legal hot water.
We'll have to see if his new lawyers give him any different advice. And Alex, we have the picture up there of the Dow Industrial Average. We're seeing some market losses today. A lot of fears on Wall Street around potential trade wars. The president has said he welcomes that trade war. We saw a drop on Wall Street, at least temporarily, when he announced those tariffs a couple of weeks ago. What is the White House saying here? Our understanding is there could be some 1,200 plus consumer products that are going to get more expensive for American consumers. Is there concern that this is going to impact the economy in a negative way, as many economists are saying?
The White House has generally just tried to downplay these losses in the Dow. They've said, they point to the dramatic gains in the Dow since President Trump took office, that it still remains, despite maybe today's losses or tomorrow's or the several weeks ago, following the announcement of those steel and aluminum tariffs when there was that dip in the Dow. They basically say that despite those period of losses, that the overall strength of the economy continues to hold, and they believe that the markets will correct themselves, and there's really no reason to worry. The president will continue to go out in front of crowds and tout those gains in the Dow and ask people to just look at your 401ks and see what the economy is doing for you. And as long as those numbers aren't dropping drastically over a long period of time, I think that's something that they're going to continue to do. As for the trade war, I mean, the president over Twitter has seemed anxious for the idea of being able to go tit for tat with countries like China, with the EU, in basically saying, you think you guys can one-up me? We'll see about that. And so I think he relishes the kind of idea that he's going to be able to put America's trade power against other countries, and he doesn't really see that there's a way that we'd come out anywhere else but on top.
Finally, Alex Malin over at the White House, the president could be getting this spending bill to his desk before the weekend. We're still waiting on the Senate a little bit. We've understood from our reporting and from reporting in the New York Times, Washington Post, and others that the president is not happy with this deal. He's been raging about it privately. Is there any worry or any sense in the White House as to whether he may not actually sign this bill, that he could send it back and prolong the government shutdown because it doesn't fulfill enough of his priorities?
Well, I think the appearance by OMB Director Mick Mulvaney just now in the briefing room kind of sought to, relieve everybody of that potential concern that the president is going to, at the very last minute, decide to just not sign this budget agreement. But I think that Mick Mulvaney made it clear that the president does intend to sign it. I think the president made clear in his tweets late last night that he's not totally excited about the idea of having to sign it. He said, he praises the idea that he was able to get $1.6 billion to start the wall on the southern border, is how he phrased it. But that is woefully short of the $25 billion that the administration was originally asking for in order to get the wall really started in exchange for that DACA fix. But he also noted in his tweet that he had to give away. He said had to waste money on dem giveaways in order to take care of military pay increase and new equipment. So you heard from Mick Mulvaney in the briefing that the administration is reconciling with the idea that they're not going to get 60 votes in the Senate on anything that would be just what they want. And so I think that they are just kind of living with that legislative reality.
And it should be noted, when Mick Mulvaney was a member of Congress, he was among those that almost certainly would be voting against this deal. A lot of his former colleagues in the House Freedom Caucus among those who were on the no side of this ledger in the House, and we're waiting on the Senate. Alex Malin over at the White House, our thanks to you. Our thanks also to Ali Rogan. We're going to keep an eye on all of these stories. You can watch all day long at abcnews.com and download the ABC News app. I'm ABC News Political Director Rick Klein. Thanks for watching.